Hey, it's Mike, and you might notice a couple of things. First off, my voice sounds not so great right now, and that's because I'm under the weather. So that's why this episode arrived later than usual. But the other reason I'm popping in here, despite my voice being like it is that we had some technical difficulties recording this conversation with Daniel Coyle. It has some intermittent audio hiccups that happen on Daniel's side of the conversation at points throughout the conversation. It doesn't diminish the content, so I decided that we were going to air this episode regardless. But I just wanted to give you a heads up so that way you'll notice there might be a few of these hiccups as you listen to the episode. Unfortunately, there's nothing that I could do to fix this in post. So I hope you'll enjoy the conversation anyway, because it was a really great one. And I've had Daniel on the show before, and it's always a great chat with him. So without further ado, I'm going to let you go so I can rest my voice and let you hear my voice along with Daniel's as we bring a productive conversation to you. Enjoy. Daniel Coyle, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. It's great to see you again, Mike. Thanks for having me.
So the first thing I want to say as I'm reading this book and going through it is this your shortest book so far, like in terms of page count?
Yeah, I think it is. I've probably written some shorter ones, but those are all like workbooks and stuff like that. And this is the one where it's like, I'm figuring out that apparently simplicity is a good thing, Mike. It's taken me a long time to figure that out.
It's the minimalism aspect, right? But what I have to say is, it's still a deep read. Like it's not something that you can kind of fly through because I mean, the idea of flourishing, to me, it's not something that you can come by easily, which you obviously get to in the book, right? We always strive for things like happiness or satisfaction or things of that nature, like especially the extreme part of happiness and things of that nature. What led you to decide to focus on this particular word and try to bring it to the forefront?
Well, thanks. That's such a good question. I think ultimately it's like the deep thing that we want, right? Happiness, success, those are kind of on the surface. And we all know people that have that, but don't necessarily have the depth, the roots, the connection. And it's that thing that we're all kind of craving, especially right now. The world feels very sped up. That we're not lacking for like information anywhere, right? But what we are lacking for is like this sense of deep, meaningful connection. And flourishing definition is joyful, meaningful growth. And so I set out to, that's the question is the book started with, which is, okay, where's that happening in this crazy world? Who's doing that? Who's doing that really well? What businesses, what entrepreneurs, what towns, what neighborhoods, what sports teams? And in exploring that, a couple surprises emerged, which is like, number one, for me, the surprise was you don't do it alone. You scratch the success story of anybody. It's like there's these roots of community, and that's how we grow. If we're going to become the best version of ourselves, we need each other. People, we need each other, and so that's really what the book is about. Is like the transformative power of creating community.
One of the things right out of the gate, the prologue, Barry Schwartz, who I've read before, the one thing I like, and you've actually wrote it on a 3x5 card, the good old fashioned index card, taped it above your desk. Yeah. People mistakenly think life is a treasure hunt, and it is not a treasure hunt. It is more like a treasure creation. And we live in a world where we hear about the pursuit of things, right? The pursuit of happiness. We're pursuing this. We're trying to acquire. Whereas in this instance, it's about creating. So to me, that speaks to the idea that you can't acquire or pursue flourishing. Would that be right?
That's exactly right. It's a thing. It's not a game. It's a thing you grow. And we're entrained on this idea from early on that life is this great game that you can win. And there are parts of life that are like that. Definitely. There's parts of life that are like a game. But deep down, sort of the deathbed, the longest view that you can possibly have, it ain't a game, it's a garden. And so the question to people is like, it sounds like I'm saying something that's just pretty and sort of sounds nice to say, like, oh, it's a garden. But actually think about it in a systematic way. Like games are machines that are fixed, like to approach life as if life is some great machine, some great watch, um, means that it's like this fixed thing. But in fact, that's not an accurate representation of what life actually is. Life is this living system that is growing, right? Your life, your business, my business. These are not fixed things. The things that adapt and live are things that tap in to the tools that help living systems grow. Like if you want your business to grow, it's not, don't treat it like a machine. Machines break. This phone in our pocket is beautiful, but you know what? Entropy is going to get it. It's going to wear out. Machines break. The only thing that actually goes against entropy and can create something new is a living system. And so approaching your business, not like, how can I build the best machine? How can I grind and do all the things? It's more like, wait a minute, how can I slow down and build something that resembles something that's alive, which means it's deeply connected, which means that it's made up of interdependent parts that can learn. Ecosystems are great because they learn. And great businesses, great entrepreneurs learn as they go and build new structures. So it's sort of a different lens to put on being productive. We normally think of being productive as like, I'm going to get things done. And this, it just, which is important, obviously, but this clicks it back a notch and says, wait a minute, I know I'm going to get things done, but what kind of system do I want to create that will help them get done in a way that makes me feel alive, in the way that deepens my relationships, and in the way that resembles the living system that is at its highest potential? Like, yeah, anybody can build a neat little mousetrap, but man, it's hard to keep that going year after year. How can we build it so that the mousetrap keeps learning and keeps adapting, and we keep learning and adapting with it?
It's the distinction between activity and state, right? I think in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Right. Exactly right. It is. It's not, we can get into that, get into that. How can you create the situation, the context, the state where things can respond as they happen? Because we know the world's going to change. That's the one thing we do know is we're going to need to be adaptive, resilient, and learning.
One of the things you bring up in chapter 2 that I want to get to, and I'm I don't know if this is a term that exists before, but I came across it, was the idea of awakening cues. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, there's sort of moments that I kept seeing when I visited these places. Is these are places that all performed at a high level. Like I went to this little deli in Ann Arbor, started as one building. Now it's a $90 million community of businesses, some high performing, professional sports teams, some technology companies, a little town in Norwich, Vermont that's produced all of these Olympians. And what they all have in common is they're really good at pausing, which is kind of a funny thing at first. Like, why do they keep kind of pausing and creating these connections? And I ended up identifying them as awakening cues. And awakening cues are basically big ass pauses. Like they're big ass pause. They're not just they're not like stopping action. They're big ass pauses where you actually stop and say, wait a minute, what matters here? What has like intrinsic value? What is can I look around and see the people around me, see the real value they have? And then can we connect to some bigger value up above? So in the clutter and fire hose of everyday life, everything's going by. You can just keep working and grinding and grinding. Or what the wise thing to do is every once in a while, stop and just do a big ass pause and say, what here really matters? And how can I contribute to the thing that matters? Not just to the next thing, but to the thing that really matters here. And, you know, those are moments that create meaning, and meaning is energy. Meaning is stability. There was one of the places I visited was this place, Zingerman's, this little deli in Ann Arbor that maybe some of your listeners are familiar with. I mean, it's a magical place, and I talked to the bakery chef there who had left the Paris Ritz-Carlton to work at this bakery in Michigan because
Wow.
it's such a great place to work. And what I found was that Walt Disney had come along and give them a $50 million offer to come into the park. Like, we want the best deli in America in our park, so come into our park. And Zingerman's took about 15 minutes and they said, no, thanks. Like, if you ever come to Ann Arbor, you're more than welcome to it. But excellence is a function of our uniqueness, our purpose, our value. What matters to us is all happening here, and we are great. Now, not every business will turn down that kind of opportunity, but it speaks to the clarity that those big ass pauses give you. By taking the time to say, who am I? What do I really, really value? What around me encompasses that? And how can I contribute to that thing in this super distracting world where everything's about scaling and being fast? That stuff's good, but only if it's operating in an ecosystem where there's actual values and actual meaning and actual relationships. And that's what those awakening cues create.
And it seems to me that it allows for a better balance between quantitative and qualitative, right? Because we live in a world that conspires for like quantitative results, like check off boxes. Here's the data. Because I mean, that offer, for example, like that's a lot of money. That's a lot of things that, I mean, it's very numerical. It's very objective. It's something you can literally look at and put on a ledger, right? But pauses, clarity, like all these, they used to call them what, soft skills or whatever, like these things
Yeah.
that are ephemeral and they're harder to measure. They're the
Right.
ones that we kind of are pulled away from because of, for lack of a better term, the nuance that
That's right.
is involved, right? So, one of the things that you that you brought up is presence, and it's funny.
Mm.
Literally about an hour before we came on the live stream, I was thinking about, like, we had a and we don't have these very often in Canada, but we had a school shooting yesterday
Right.
in
Right.
Canada,
Right. Right.
and it was and what I noticed, other than obviously the tragedy, was this desire to get everything now. We want to know who did it, what, like, we want that instantaneous kind
Right.
of information, whether it's accurate or not, right? Whether
Right.
it's, we just want that fix. And it, to me, I'm like, that doesn't lend itself to presence. And you talk about presence in the book. What is the role of patience in all of this? Because patience and
Yeah.
presence, I think, are cousins. I'd love for, because people will, again, they're trying to acquire this. I want to flourish, but
Mhm.
patience has to play a role in that.
Massive, massive role. Because really, we're taught that our attention is only one thing, right? Focus. When I say the word attention, you think, well, what are you focused on? Actually, that's incorrect. When you look at the science, we have two attentional systems. One is about focus, and it's very sort of shallow and grabby, and it's the stuff that where we want to control things. It evolved so that we could get food, identify food, grab food. But there's a whole that's called task attention. But there's a whole other system of attention that competes with task attention. It's called relational attention. And relational attention is basically about waiting to see what's actually there, waiting and seeing what's going on. And the best way to activate it is kind of tricky. You activate it through questions. There was actually a shooting in Cincinnati a few years ago. And one of the people I write about in the book, his name is Peter Block. He's one of the most brilliant people at creating presence. When you walk, he's about 80 years old now. When you walk up to him and you say, "Here's what I'm working on, Peter," he will respond. He'll say, "Well, that sounds great, but why does that matter to you, Mike? Like, tell me more. Why does this project matter? Why does this podcast matter to you?" And he'll sit there and wait and ask it again and tell you, like, dig down. He wants to create presence. He wants to create meaning. And there's a school shooting in his neighborhood, and so they invited, just like it's happening in Canada right now, we're going to have a community meeting, and we're going to talk about this stuff. We're going to bring everybody together. So the community shows up thinking that they were going to get a report. You know, here's the police saying, here's what happened. Here's what we're going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again, that they were going to receive that. But Peter was running the meeting. So he flipped it. And he said, get in small groups with people you know the least. Get in groups of 3. Now, the question I want you to explore is, when did you start caring about this neighborhood? Like, simple question. But that simple question flipped, like, oh, we want answers from all this too. Wait a minute. We all actually live in this neighborhood. We bear responsibility to making it safe. And then he asked another question. He said, what's your responsibility to making this neighborhood less safe than it otherwise would have been? And in those questions, he created space for people to stop, a big ass pause, you might say, and say, wait a minute, I can't just be grabbing, trying to fix this and jump into solutions. And it's the exact same dynamic we see with so many, I think, entrepreneurs and people trying to be productive. There's always the temptation to jump to a solution. And yet the most brilliant business people and entrepreneurs I know, they don't. They dwell in the question. If they try to formulate the question right in the right way, they talk to a lot of people, they explore the question, they dwell in curiosity. And that moment where you're kind of not, if you tune into the way your brain works, you'll sense this graspy, hungry quality. But then you also have the other quality, which is, hey, look, I can just kind of wait. I can just kind of be patient here. Instead of trying to provide all the answers and the value, I should ask the best possible question right now. And that is what we see because that doesn't answers drive people apart. Questions are where meaning and energy and connection are born.
Speaking of meaning, right off the top, the book's subtitle is The Art of Building Meaning, Joy, and Fulfillment. There's a
Mhm.
famous book about meaning called Man's Search for Meaning. This goes back to your quote in the prologue, right? About,
Yeah.
searching versus, pursuing versus actually creating. So, what for those, like, I'm not going to say that you're going to dismiss Viktor Frankl's seminal
No,
work,
I don't think so.
but what I'm saying is the distinction. I think again back to that meaning aspect because I think people are on this quest. What are some of the things that and maybe some examples? I know you mentioned Julia Cameron's in the book, The Morning Pages, and I know
Mhm.
you've got a bunch of other examples in here. I'm going to circle back to the San Antonio Spurs, who I don't believe are mentioned in here, but I know you've talked about them before, worked with them before, and we'll circle back to that. But this idea of building meaning versus a search for meaning, can you kind of illustrate the distinction between and maybe how either they mesh or how they are, how they maybe the search is first and then the building is second? Like, I'd love to hear some thoughts around that.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think the title, I mean, of that book is famously wonderful and accurate, and it is a search. It is a search, but in the end, it reminds me of something somebody said, I think it was Joseph Campbell. He said, "People think what they're looking for is the meaning of life, like that there's some secret code that they will learn, some
It,
meaning, some literal understanding, when actually what they're seeking is the experience of aliveness,
yeah,
the
because it's
experience of aliveness."
because Douglas Adams pointed this out too. The meaning of life is 42, right? Like, that's so silly and ridiculous,
Yeah,
but that's the point, right?
I know, here we are, right? It takes you back to the now, and I think the search does that too, that search never really stops. What I saw in the places that I visited was that they were very rooted in the now. That's what that pause was, and it was always about the meaning was always something that was already waiting for them. It wasn't like they had to I had a feeling, when I was growing up that meaning would be like, "Oh, I'll get to the top of the mountain and the guru will whisper it in my ear, and then it'll be coming from the outside." But in fact, what they're describing is more like a process of attuning to the things that are already in you. And one of the ways there's a psychologist at Columbia named Lisa Miller that I spoke with quite a bit for this book. And she has an exercise that really captures that. It's called the counsel exercise that I write about in the book. And it's really simple. You close your eyes and then you picture a wooden table and then you picture the people in your life who are truly on your side. People not just now living or dead, who are truly on your side, who truly have your best interest in mind. Picture them there and just take a second and do that. They could be family, they could be mentors, they could be coaches, they could be colleagues. Truly have your best interest in mind. And now you take a seat at that table and now ask them, what is it that I need to know right now that's important? Like, steer me a little bit. What do I need to know? And then you listen to their response. Now, I'm not a woo-woo guy, as you know. Like,
Hmm.
this stuff makes me break out in hives just slightly. But when you understand how relational attention works, and when you see these big ass pauses in these places and you see them stop and say, wait a minute, that answer was in me all along. Like I have it calls it my counsel, those people. Like they didn't, those were just my neurons firing, but they were all memories. They were already inside me. Meaning wasn't like sought after, it was just kind of revealed. I mean, the word remember literally means to like remember something, to connect it again. It
Hmm.
was already there waiting to be connected. And so these pauses end up being places where that remembering happens. So the mean so what so that explains the approach of a lot of leaders that I saw. They saw the inherent meaning in people already. They didn't like wait, you didn't have to prove yourself to Greg Popovich, right?
Right.
He sees your value. He sees the meaning in you. And I think that's the powerful thing about those kinds of leaders. We talk about them as if they're magic and we talk about the belief that they encounter. But what they're really doing is doing something kind of like the council exercise. They're actually seeing the world more clearly. They're not seeing you as a stranger. They're seeing you as the person you kind of actually are. And that's why their leadership is so powerful.
Back to the Spurs. I mean, I know you've talked about them in your previous work. You've worked with them, but I mean, it's interesting that now, as we're recording this, they are quote flourishing. Right? They are
Yeah.
doing. I mean,
Yeah.
for after years of maybe mediocrity or even struggling, now
Mhm.
they're back at the top of the game. I mean, they beat the defending champions a multitude of times, even when the Thunder were at full strength. I mean, they've also beat
Mhm.
them when they've not been at full strength, and that's fine. But to me, it's almost indicative of this idea that this is who we are, this is the
Mhm.
process,
Mhm.
and this is we're going to have dips. We're going to have these times, but we know, I mean, what was the phrase was trust the process, right? Trust the process and
That's right.
no stars. And the interesting thing is that they never pursued stars, but they recognized those that would be part, like David Robinson, Tim Duncan. Obviously,
Mhm.
Wemby is in that conversation now. Same with some of the other guys that they brought up, but that's not their focus. And so, to me, I almost would say that a team like the Spurs, that culture, that organization, is a great example of staying in that flourishing lane.
I agree, and we can add on it too by saying what else is happening there. Imperfection is actually kind of beautiful. Like, we sort of want our organizations to run like machines that never make a mistake and go, but ultimately machines create inhumanity. Like to run things but as if you were a machine is to treat people as objects. There was a moment that I heard about after I wrote the first book where Tim Duncan, the top five player all time, came back to coach at the Spurs, and they were doing workouts, and a younger player threw up, and Tim Duncan wiped up the vomit of the younger player as an assistant coach. Like, now that is a very small act, right? It doesn't take very long. It's not very fun, but what an incredible signal of care and of mattering. Talk about a big ass pause. Like that made everybody stop and look and see that and understand what was happening and connect to it in a deeper way. And they do those kind of moments all the time, like any flourishing group. And you accept that it's not going to be perfect. And there's a couple other things that you accept too. There's a great phrase that I came across again and again in the writing of this book, which is that annoyance is the price of community. Annoyance. Like we're used to kind of not wanting to be annoyed. We've kind of been trained in it that we should, swipe and our dinner should show up on the back of our doorstep and all that frictionless stuff is also a machine, right? That's also inhuman. But to actually have human frictiony interactions um, is kind of annoying and transcendent. That's the thing. It is also the only route by treating people like that, by creating communities where people can help each other and serve each other and have a little friction and sometimes be a little annoying. That's that's just because we're annoying too, right? No, everybody's kind of annoying, right? Period. No way to
Mhm.
avoid it. And to turn toward that and embrace that kind of imperfection. It's tremendously liberating, I think, especially for people in business to say, I remember seeing the CEO at Zingerman's orient bringing some new employees on, orienting them. And his message to them was, we need you. We have so many imperfections around here and you have fresh eyes. And we need you to look at all of our process. You can make us better. Like, and it was the opposite of what you would normally have, which is, hey, you're pretty new here, kid. We'll show you the ropes.
Yeah.
Um, it was such a reach out and such an expression of their value. And it gave them an opportunity to add value. And that's mattering. That's what these places are good at. They're small signals that send a really big human message.
I want to give a shout out to Bob Snanke, who's watching on LinkedIn. He said, first off, we're going to get to your body of work here because at the end you talk about like writing a book and how it changes you. But he said The Talent Code is one of his favorite 20 books of all time. So there
Oh,
you go, a
cool.
little bit of a shout out there. And he also said that in
Thanks.
his opinion, it all comes down to clarity. When leaders convey clarity, and so that, like the example you just gave, is clarity.
Mhm.
Teams prosper. And the thing is, you know, I've talked about this, you've talked about this, but this idea that, you know, that pause, it doesn't have to be like the big pauses are hard. Any pause is hard,
Mhm.
really, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, you know, when you have I remember going to the Yukon with my wife's from the Yukon, and we went up there and there was this lake called Patricia Lake, and it was like pristine, clear. You could see the reflection of the mountains on the water as if it was like a mirror. And then you
Mm.
threw a rock in there and all of a sudden it got distorted. It wasn't, you know, and if there were more rocks, or let's say there was rain coming down, it would be even more distorted. So that clarity allows you to get the bigger picture. And if we look at it from that metaphorical angle, I think it's worth the pause. So my next question is, how do we keep ourselves from filling the pauses? Because there are plenty of things to fill the pauses
Oh,
with.
man. Yeah, that's the question, isn't it, Mike? It's true. It's true. I think there are a few things. The biggest one, to go back to the talent code, is practice. Like, once you do it a few times and you endure the silence and you suspend your activity and you stop and you breathe and appreciate what's around you, and it's a practice, right? You almost think of it as a grounding practice. Your life always is lifting us 4 feet off the ground and sending us scurrying after shiny objects, right? And
Mhm.
you can do that, but it will wear you out. It will grind you out. So this grounding practice it's not like an extra thing. It's like essential for your attentional health, right? Where you got to turn off that task attention and turn on the wide beam of relational attention and see what matters and see what matters. But I guess to endure it too is to realize how collaborative a process the pause is. You're
Mhm.
not pausing so that you can suddenly turn into the Dalai Lama and I speak the answer, right? You're really giving people the opportunity to fill that in. And maybe those people are your counsel in your head. Maybe it's your favorite writer that you go like to read. Maybe it's thinking about conversations you have with other people, but it is always kind of a social process. And the leaders I've seen who are really good at this are really good at kind of really signaling their humility. I'm probably wrong about this. What do you think about this question? Now it's up to you. Simple phrases like that end up kind of in a hierarchical world, creating that space. That's another term that the woo woo allergy person in me, like I'm allergic to terms like creating space. But actually, that captures it. It kind of captures it. You're like making a space, literally, cognitively, attentionally, for somebody to notice something that you might not notice. And so that level of humility lets you look at that proverbial Yukon lake and see it clearly, and let the ripples settle down a little bit.
Well, and you actually bring up the idea of creating space in the Awakening Cues chapter, right? Where you're
Mm.
talking about, there's a distinction around that. There's a subtlety. I also wonder if people need to stop thinking about pauses as taking a break.
Yeah, right. And it can feel like a break, and you always come back kind of more stable. I love your listener's point that it is about clarity, right? The pause is designed for you to get clarity, to ground yourself in clarity, and that is stabilizing and energizing, right? So you're not just suspending activity so you can breathe and get your heart rate back down and recover. You're actually trying to get a different perspective on yourself and on your problems and on what they mean. You need to find that mattering, that meaning.
Right. Last question before we wrap things up, and it's in the epilogue. Uh,
Yeah.
you wrote, writing a book like every journey leaves you changed.
Mhm.
So what I've noticed over your body of work is that softness isn't the right word. I'm going to use it
Mhm.
anyways, but there's been this, um, it almost goes from, I wouldn't say, I'll just, I want to get your thoughts on it, but it seems like prescriptive to philosophical
Mhm.
to a degree. And I think it
Yeah.
has a lot to do with, at least in my own work, just the depth. You spend so much time in the arena that you get to see more, think more, go deeper. Is this like, what was the experience like for you? I mean, what changed you with this book? And over the larger body of work, what have you said? Oh, well, this is where I was, and this is where I am now, and this process has led me to where I'm at, and knowing full well that it'll probably continue to evolve.
I know. I know. It's kind of fun. I didn't really set out to write a trilogy, but it sort of worked out accidentally that way. Like I started with individuals. That's how I was going through the world. Like I'm an individual. I want to grow talent. So I focused on individual talent. What's that made of? But that led me to like, wait a minute, these coaches are having this like there's something going on here in these groups, which led me to how do certain groups add up to more than the sum of their parts, which is the culture code. Like, what's going on there? Right. And each mystery leads to the next mystery, and it did absolutely coincide with the way my life sort of was shaped. I mean, I was when I started the first book, I was kind of an individual, and now got 4 daughters, and I'm interested in group dynamics. And as I'm writing this one, my daughters are moving out of the house, and my wife and I are moving to the next chapter. And so I begin that my parents pass away, and you begin to think these deeper thoughts. I think it's just kind of a kind of general purpose human journey. Like life does actually, I mean, this is, I guess I wouldn't have known this as a 20 something, or I wouldn't have bought it. But I think there is like a real richness to life that you can get as you get older. And I think the science bears this out, like happiness and so these other sort of metrics show this happening where it's like people are really content in their 50s and 60s. And that's not necessarily because their bodies are super strong or because their minds are faster. Actually, the opposite. Their minds are getting slower
Yep.
and their bodies are getting weaker. Um, yet, I guess that just goes to show how what a super complex. It ain't a machine, man. It's like machines break down as they get older, and so parts of us are. But our experience of life deepens because it actually is a garden. Because you actually look back and look at those relationships and that conversation I had with somebody, and like you start to see these connections, and it's delightful, and it's also energizing to go through that. So it has been. I appreciate you pointing that out. I haven't thought about it that way before.
I love the idea of, and I think this is I've noticed this, is that there is a contentment when you get to, like, I'll be 52 this year. There's a
Mhm,
level of contentment that I believe, and not everybody, it doesn't happen for everybody. Like, I mean,
mhm,
everyone's unique, but there's a level of contentment where you are, quote, comfortable in your own skin. So you've got these abilities
mhm.
to say, I'm not going to go down this path, or I'm going to, like, and I think that's also relation to time in that, hey, this much time has passed, and the amount of time that I'm going to have left, or this relationship with time I'm going to have left, is winding down. So I
Yeah.
think there's this narrowing of not focus, but this narrowing of like, I don't need to prove myself the way I felt
Mhm.
I needed to when I was younger. And it's that cruel. I mean, you hear about it. I wish I knew then what I know now. Like all those aphorisms that you
Right.
hear, and you're like, yeah, whatever. But then you're like, yep, that's why that's why they're cliche. That's why they're this.
I
And I
know.
mean, and I feel the same way. Like when you're writing something, it's an expression. It's almost, it, to me, and I wonder if this is the same for you. It's almost like you're writing to figure things out.
Completely. You're writing to figure out. And that's why, when we talk about the power of questions, I mean, I've been propelled. That's these mysteries, like what's talent made of? What's going on in great groups? Those are deep mysteries. And I think, you know, if I were to go back and give advice to my younger self, I'd be like, it's all about the questions, dude. Like, don't worry about the answers. They'll take care of themselves. But to actually dwell in those questions and explore them and live as I think Rilke once said, you have to live into the question. And I think that's a nice way to put it. Like you can't sit and think about it. Because that's the other thing that I guess I would tell my younger self, which is like, I would say words are overrated.
Mm,
Like it's a weird thing for a writer to say,
the
but I
irony.
think that as time goes on, like words are only part of the story and words can sometimes bewitch you and make you think that things are really concrete and sure, and they're actually not. I mean, it's impossible. The more important something is, the harder it is to express it in words, like the birth of your child or I love my wife. Like I can use words, but that doesn't do it, right?
Yeah.
So for the big things in life, don't get hung up on words. Like do actions. Like let your actions, explore and express what you want to where you want to go.
And I think honestly, the words come when you don't expect them to. Like, I mean, I think that's part of it too. Like if you're actively trying to articulate, that's
Mhm.
where you can trip up. But sometimes it's just in the moment. And you're like, wait, I said that. Like there's times where I'll say something, I'm like, why?
Yeah,
I've been trying to say it. Like I think I figured it out in this instance, right?
I know.
But
I know.
but those are those. I think those are rare moments. Like they're scarce. They're not. And again, as writers, like you're always thinking, okay. Like I mean, when you read somebody, I remember seeing The Holdovers recently. My son's getting into films now because he's
Mm,
15. My daughter's off at college, and she's watching. And what I'm seeing with my kids, and this is actually related to this, is they are literally flourishing. Like they have,
mhm.
my daughter's off, my son is like exploring, and he's at that age where he's starting to figure things out and explore things,
Cool.
but is curious. And so we're watching The Holdovers together, and there's a scene in the museum where not the museum scene, sorry, where and spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen it yet, the Meditations comes up, the book Meditations. I don't know if you've seen it at all, Daniel. Have you seen the movie?
I have. I have. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So great.
Where the character by Paul Giamatti gives everybody a copy of Meditations, and it's just you. I saw that and I'm like, he's trying to explain why Meditations matters to him, and
Mhm,
he's so much part of the academia that he can't
mhm,
really just say like this book really matters to me. Like he's saying
mhm,
like it's this book and this book. He's selling it, right?
mhm.
And they're not buying it initially.
No.
Like they're not going to buy it when it's given to them. They'll maybe buy it when they read it, right? And I think that that's
Mhm.
another, like, so we can talk about this like ad infinitum, but it's when you read it, your words will be interpreted, and that's why when you write a book, it's no longer yours, right?
That's so true. That's so true. There's a book you write, and there's a book people read, and there's a beautiful space between those that conversations like this can happen that are really, really fun.
So the book is called Flourish: The Art of Building Meaning, Joy, and Fulfillment. Dan, where can people get a copy of the book and keep up with the work that you're doing?
Thanks. All the usual spots at danielcoyle.com is a good spot if you want to send me a note or anything at all.
All right. And Daniel, thanks for having a productive conversation with me today.
This is a blast, Mike. Thank you.